Welcome everyone. My name is Christy. I am a bookseller at Belmont Books, which is an independent bookstore in Belmont, Massachusetts. I am so excited to welcome you to this event. I will be introducing our two in conversation panelists, and I'll be sharing some links to purchase their work from Belmont Books. If you have any questions for Amy or Erica, please put them in the Q&A function in Zoom. If you click on the little 3 dots, you can see Q&A in the pull-up menu, and we'll be answering questions at the end. Yeah, ask away. So now, without further ado, Erica Engelhaupt is a science journalist and editor who has written for newspapers and magazines, including National Geographic, Science News, and the Philadelphia Inquirer and NPR. She began her career as a scientist and holds master's degrees in biology and environmental science. She lives in Knoxville, Tennessee with her husband and 2 very photogenic cats, which I'm gonna need proof of that. And Amy Stewart is the author of over a dozen books, including The Drunken Botanist, Girl Waits with Gun, and Wicked Plants. She lives in Portland, Oregon. So now, Amy and Erica, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. It's good to be here. And, you know, I thought, Erica, that maybe the first thing we should do is to explain the connection between you and me, apart from the fact that our subject matter overlaps a little bit.
Absolutely. I mean, so when I started working on the book Gory Details, one of the first books that my editor pointed out to me happened to be called Wicked Bugs by Amy Stewart. And she was, you know, she said she really kind of saw sort of my style and certainly some of my subject matter when it comes to creepy crawlies as being kind of like this book. And so she told me to check it out. And in particular, she really loved all of the really beautiful creepy crawly illustrations in the book. And we ended up actually using the same illustrator for Gory Details, who did the lovely cover art and all of the really, I mean, she can make disgusting things look so either adorable or beautiful. It's amazing. Bryony Morrow Cribbs. And so, you know, I knew that we shared an illustrator, at least for our books. And so I was very excited when a few months back, Amy actually spoke to a local writing group that I'm a member of. And I got all excited and I brought a copy of my book to show her via Zoom.
Yes, and the rest is history.
Yeah, exactly.
But let me just say this about Bryony's work. And so she also illustrated Wicked Plants. So, you know, here's sort of an example of what Wicked Plants illustrations look like. I had pitched my books as illustrated books. I don't know if you originally thought of yours as being illustrated or not, but I knew that I wanted this to be illustrated. And the search for an illustrator was kind of all over the map, and sometimes I was involved and sometimes I wasn't involved, and it was sort of a fraught thing for me because I'd never had a book illustrated before. And I'm married to a rare book dealer, and we were at an antiquarian bookstore in Seattle that also has a gallery space, and they show really fine lithographs and etchings and things like that. And they had this little show of Bryony's work, and it was all just crazy stuff, like these fantastical sort of medieval looking monsters, like half tiger and half dragon, you know, these really bizarre creatures. And I took some pictures, and Bryony wasn't there, but her work was on the wall. And I sent it to my publisher, and my publisher was like, oh man, this stuff is amazing, but I seriously doubt we can afford her. And I'm like, well, come on, surely it wouldn't hurt to ask. Like, let's just find out. And it turns out that she was like 24 years old at the time. I mean, she was just starting out, and she was already so phenomenal. And so we begged and pleaded, and she did the illustrations. But here's the thing I didn't understand fully going into this. You know, what she does is she does copper plate etchings. So she is scratching into a plate of copper, which means that they're backwards, in order to make this work. And she used to send me the pencil sketch ahead of time for me to look at and make sure it's like botanically accurate, or in the case of the bugs, morphologically accurate. And I would say things like, you know, it needs to be hairier. There's all these tiny little stinging hairs, and I'm really not seeing that. And it wasn't until I saw her with her jeweler's glasses making these tiny marks that I realized what I was asking for. It's like, this is how books were illustrated 400 years ago. No one's books are illustrated like this anymore. So shout out to Bryony, because she's using this ancient technology to illustrate modern books, and it's incredible.
Oh my God. Well, now I have even more appreciation for some of the things that she did. I mean, so for the creepy crawlies, you know, we spent a lot of time talking about, you know, kind of doing ideas for the kinds of things that she could include in these illustrations. For each chapter, she did a big, you know, spread. And I don't know if you recognize the face here.
Oh, now I do.
For the creepy crawlies, she actually had me send her a photograph of myself. And then I really didn't know exactly what she was going to do with it. And then this turned up in my email, you know, with the sketch of, you know, my face covered in roaches and wasps. And there was a roach coming out from behind my ear. And she was like, I hope you're not freaked out by this, by like the idea of your face covered in bugs. And I was like, I love it.
Yes, this is my new Facebook social media profile forever.
Exactly.
Awesome.
I mean, it's awesome. So yeah, I have so much appreciation for what the art can add, you know, something like this, because I thought, you know, when you write a book called Gory Details and it's all about things that are considered gross or disgusting, it's like, how do you illustrate that? You know, I mean, it's not,
right.
I sort of lack in beautiful art.
Yes.
I just wrote a story about parasites actually for National Geographic that's on their website now. And the story's about how a lot of parasites are going extinct, and biologists and conservationists are actually starting to think, you know, not all parasites are, you know, harmful to humans. The vast majority of them are not, and many of them are really important actually to the ecosystems and environments they live in. So maybe we need to start saving the parasites, save the endangered parasites, and that was one where the first question from my editor was, okay, well, what kind of beautiful parasite art can we come up with? Because I just tend to write about things that are maybe not the most photogenic.
Yes. And we should warn our audience, this could potentially get very gross. So everyone needs to be prepared for there's going to be some rather disgusting topics. The name of the book is Gory Details, after all.
Right.
So maybe you could tell us just kind of how you came to this book, like, and sort of set up the book and also how you made the choices of what to include and the scope of it a little.
Yeah. Well, so it started off, you know, gosh, back in like 2013, I started a blog and called it Gory Details because I was interested, you know, I'm a science journalist. I am an editor. I was working at Science News Magazine, and I was doing a lot of things like writing reviews of other popular science books because I love them and I love to read them. I love to write about them. And I kind of looked over at my bookshelf one day and realized that all of the science books on my bookshelf had titles like Blood Work and The Killer of Little Shepherds. And, you know, and That's Disgusting. And it was all, you know, all these books that were about things that were kind of gross or morbid or creepy. And I love forensic science. I love all of that stuff. And so it just kind of came to me in a flash. So I was like, I want to do a blog and I want to call it Gory Details because that's what I love. I love digging into the gory details of all of these things. And so it started off as a blog at Science News Magazine. And then when I went to work for National Geographic, I brought it with me and continued it there on their website. And so several years ago, I decided to go freelance. And left National Geographic, moved to Tennessee from DC, and but I still wanted to write about gory details, and the folks from National Geographic got in touch with me and said, you know, we're kind of wondering if maybe this might be turned into a book. You know, do you think you'd have enough there, and are you interested in you know, writing up a proposal for it? And of course I was, and I did. And the fun thing was, you know, I had all of this cool blog material, but the fun part was going through and thinking about the broader themes within the things that I'm in. Why am I interested in the things that I'm interested in? Why did I write this story? You know, what are kind of the deeper connections between them? And when I started thinking about that, I realized there were these kind of recurring themes like taboos and morbid curiosity that kept, you know, coming up over and over again in what seemed like pretty disparate topics. And so I got to basically outline the book according to some of those themes, and then choose some of the blog posts to include in the book, and think about other things that I, you know, what were sort of the things I'd been dreaming about writing, or, you know, things maybe involving some travel, things like that. So that was fun. So, you know, for example, you know, when I started thinking about the chapter on death, morbid curiosity, you know, I had always really wanted to go to see these dioramas that are used for teaching detectives about crime scene investigation, called the Nutshell Studies of Unexplained Death.
I just
Love
have to
them.
show you.
Oh, of course you have it. Of course you have the book. Yes.
I'm obsessed with this book. I'm obsessed with her. She's amazing. You guys,
She's
Nutshell
amazing.
Studies of Unexplained Death. It's incredible.
It's incredible. So this woman in the 40s and 50s, Frances Glessner Lee, she's basically considered like the mother of forensic science. She was just a wealthy woman who, because of, you know, the times and the social class that she was in, she was not encouraged to go to medical school herself, or to, you know, pursue a career in law enforcement herself. But she not only funded the first medico-legal program at Harvard University, but she also built these incredible little houses, little, like, they're like doll houses.
They're like murder doll houses.
Like crazy murder doll houses that are super, super accurate. Like, if there's blood spatter, the pattern of the blood spatter means something.
Yeah.
You know, if there are hidden clues inside all of these things, there are things that you can't even see, that she put in there anyway. Like, you know, if you were to look inside a tiny garbage can, there would be like little tiny pieces of trash in it. She was truly obsessive. And I had always wanted to go see these things. They went on display at the Smithsonian once, and it was like a mob scene, you know, just to be able to see some of them. But they're actually housed in the medical examiner's office in Baltimore, and they hold a homicide seminar every year for law enforcement officers. And occasionally they will let a journalist sneak in. And I wanted to do this so bad because I had written about them in National Geographic, you know, did some beautiful photography of them. And so I managed, you know, for the book, I managed to get into that homicide seminar and actually go see how detectives are trained to use those, to you know, test their crime solving skills, you know, using those dioramas, as well as going through like a week of super intense seminars and discussions on every possible cause of death, and how medical examiners, you know, determine what the cause of death is, and so forth. So there were all kinds of really intense, you know, photos from actual crime scenes and from autopsies and things like that. So it was both very intense and but also really fascinating. And if you're someone like me who you know, loves things like the CSI and, those kinds of shows, even though I know that a lot of times they don't get the science right. It was really cool to see it in real life. And so that was, that was the kind of opportunity that I got to do through the book that, I couldn't devote the kind of time and resources for a blog post to go do those kinds of things. But the book was a wonderful excuse to get to go do some of that stuff. I don't know if have you gotten to do things like that for some of your books, Amy, where you got
Of
to go,
course.
the field research is like the best part.
Research is the best possible excuse for some really interesting travel. I mean, with Wicked Plants, I happened to be in England for another reason, but I took an extra day and I went to the Onyx Poison Garden in Northumberland, where the Duchess of Northumberland has planted a garden of poisonous plants.
Oh, that's a great passion project.
Yes, yeah, it was amazing. And also the Chelsea Physic Garden in London, which is basically like a 400-year-old pharmacist garden, has a collection of poisonous plants as well. So yeah, any opportunity to go do things like that it's always fascinating.
Yeah, have you seen a corpse flower?
Sure, yeah.
Okay.
I spent a lot of time. Oh, okay. Well, I spent a lot of time in botanical gardens, so yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Corpse flowers, for those of you who don't know, the thing is that the smell they're pollinated by carrion flies. So they have to smell like a rotting corpse in order to attract carrion flies. And so they're super gross to us, but very attractive to the flies. And, I think that raises an interesting point, which is I'm thinking about how you sort of came up with the parameters for the book and what broad categories things were going to fit into. I had sort of the same thing with the Wicked books, where my criteria for what I included was that it had to have been in some ways harmful to a person or to a population of people. So like a bug that eats other bugs is not that wicked. It's just making a living. But a bug that can be super harmful to people. And even then, I wanted to narrow it down even further in that I didn't care if it could kill someone. I wanted to know who it had killed. So that was the criteria. Like, do I have an interesting, unusual story about the person who was harmed, not just broadly that it could do this, but when did it do it and how and why? And so what that brings up, I think, is that science writing, the field of science is a way of explaining the world to humans.
Yeah.
In other words, a tree doesn't care what its Latin name is. It doesn't care what its taxonomy is. We're the ones who care. We're the ones who need to give it a name and organize it and categorize it and understand it, right? So science is really a narrative that we tell ourselves about the world so that we can understand it, but the rest of the world has no use for science, right? The ants do not care about E.O. Wilson. E.O. Wilson is interested in the ants. The ants are not interested in E.O. Wilson. And so, when we talk about what's gory, it's gory because it's gory to us. It's not gory to them.
Exactly. And that's something that, that's something I've thought about a lot because, some of the things that I write about, for example, one of my pet subjects and that I'm writing about more for National Geographic going forward is involves women's health. And in particular, I'm really interested in menstruation and how that's something where this is a natural bodily function that half of humankind experiences. And yet it's been really stigmatized and taboo. And, for whatever reasons, the association with blood and so forth. And so we have a lot of feelings about things like that. And I don't, by writing it and including things about it in a book called Gory Details, I'm not implying that I think menstruation is gross. I don't think women's bodies are gross, but it falls into that category of things that many people think are gross or creepy or, are disconcerted by. And I think that's really kind of at the heart of it. The things that I write about are things, it is like you're saying, it's about human perception. It's those things that we have a reaction to. In my case, a negative reaction. I'm interested in why are we disgusted by certain things and not others. Where does that come from? And how does it actually shape us? You know, and I think that there are so many things that we're afraid or embarrassed to talk about that we stigmatize, we make them off limits. You can't talk about that stuff. And we humans are kind of are really, I think, unique in our sense of disgust. You know, we have taken something that starts out as like a basic aversion to things that could make you sick or harm you, which, you know, lots of animals might have, you know, if eating another animal's poop could make them sick, then they, you know, they have an aversion to it. Other animals like dogs, you know.
I was about to say, anyone who owns a dog understands that that other creatures don't have the same level of disgust that humans do. Yeah,
exactly. We're the masters of disgust.
Yes,
We're the only ones that have taken disgust and applied it to so many things. I mean, we've elaborated on it to the point where we have this concept of manners, which are largely about protecting each other from being disgusted. When you think about it, I mean, why is it, you know, why is it poor manners to, you know, to pass gas in public or to burp, or, you know, these are things that we don't do. We don't chew with our mouths open at the dinner table because that's disgusting to another person. So we have, you know, we're so sensitive to disgust that, as far as I know, we're the only animals in the world that have an entire, you know, rule book of manners, simply to protect one another from being disgusted. I mean, I don't think you're going to see any other animal in nature like really worrying about, you know, covering its mouth with shoes, or, you know, they're just doing their thing.
Yes. And so when I was going through your book and I was sort of marking like, oh, what things would I most like to talk about? And so I'm going to warn you guys, I'm going to go there.
Go there.
We're about to go there. Well, let me first just say that a thing that I used to do whenever one of my books came out, I was writing always about the plant world, is that I would go and speak to my local garden club in the town where I lived in Eureka, and they would be my test run for my talk that I was going to go give on the road. And they knew that was their purpose, and they kind of loved it, and it was the thing we did together. Well, when Wicked Bugs came out, I walked in and I did my talk as always, and I included the two things that most fascinated me in Wicked Bugs, which were maggots and tapeworms. And people got up and walked out. And I realized, like, oh, I can't, there's a line here. There's a line that I can't cross. I was genuinely interested in them. And then when the book came out, I did Fresh Air, and it was with Dave Davies. It wasn't with Terry Gross, it was with Dave Davies. And we're not face to face. He's in Philadelphia and I'm in wherever I was, on headphones and radio stations. But he asked me, like, what are your most interesting ones? And the thing with doing Fresh Air is they tell you, you know, we're going to talk for a long time and edit it way back. So you can say whatever you want, and we're going to cut it. So he asked me, what are your favorites? And I said, well, if I can't really tell you my favorites because, you know, people get up and walk out when I start talking about it. So you don't want to hear my real favorites. He goes, oh yeah, well now I do. And so I really got into what interested me about maggots and parasites. And then there's this long pause on the other end, and he goes, my producer is laying on the floor right now. But you have a section on maggots in the book, and let's just say that a maggot is nothing but a baby fly.
That's right. I mean,
it's just a cute little baby fly. Now, you went in a different direction with maggots, and I was really surprised to find out what direction you went in. The direction that I went in is what they eat. Mm-hmm. And I'm particularly interested in the ability of maggots or baby flies to clean up wounds that won't heal from infection. And I have to tell you, if I was ever unfortunate enough to be hospitalized with a terrible infection that would not heal, I would be like, bring the maggots, bring them. I could watch them all day. I'm so ready for that treatment. I'm utterly fascinated with the idea of these little creatures who can go in and just get at the infected area and leave the healthy tissue. It sounds miraculous to me. But you did not talk about what maggots eat. So what did you talk about?
No, I talked about us eating them. Yes, maggots as food, because I went to a conference on eating insects a couple years ago, and it was scientists and people from industry, all these people, and I had no idea that there was an entire emerging industry of people who are farming maggots as a food source. I mean, when you think about it, they'll eat just about anything, right? Like
Yeah.
they'll eat food waste. You know, you can feed them anything. Like you could feed them manure, you could feed them whatever you want to get rid of, more or less. And, you know, if it's got any nutrition in it, they'll eat it. And so, and then they basically turn that into this really kind of high quality little, you know, protein packet of their little baby fly bodies. And they grow really quickly and it's pretty efficient and so forth. So so I met folks who are scientists who have been studying the maggots, the babies of black soldier flies, which are they're really popular in this industry. And, you know, they're just kind of innocuous looking little flies. They're bigger than a house fly, but I would say not even as gross looking as a house fly. As far as flies go, they're sort of cute little black with a little blue iridescent kind of color to them, nice little flies. And their babies look just like pretty much every other, you know, maggot, just a little white, you know, little squirmy things. But when you look at them really up close, they kind of they almost look like they have a little face, you know, they've got like two little eye spots, little mouth, and they're actually kind of cute. And so I got to go visit a lab where they are, they're growing these things and doing all kinds of experiments. And they were growing them on everything. They had tested everything from like chicken poop. I met the poor grad student who had to do those experiments of like like going out to chicken, you know, farms and like collecting the chicken poop and then basically growing maggots on the chicken poop. But it turns out that this is actually a pretty big business, and not that necessarily you and I are going to be like going to the store and buying like, you know, maggot snack crisps anytime soon, probably. But you have almost certainly eaten, if you eat meat, then you've almost certainly eaten an animal that has been fed maggots, because they can basically be, you know, grown in a facility. They're clean, you know, I mean, you feed them something dirty and then they grow into maggots and those can be cleaned. And then they can be, you know, basically ground up into meal and added to different foods for chickens, pigs, fish. They're really huge in Chinese aquaculture where they're growing fish. You know, kind of a great way of recycling waste into food. And so that's kind of how the maggots are getting into our food stream. And I did taste, they had some black soldier fly larvae freeze dried, and I did taste one, and it tasted like kind of nothing, like a little bit cardboardy.
Okay.
I would say. So I don't think they're probably going to catch on as like snack food. But, you know, honestly, like, you know, you could, if you ground them up and put them in something, you would never know the difference. So There you go. That's comforting, right?
Right. Well, it's a protein source.
Yeah.
But, you know, so what's interesting about that, though, I mean, both of our examples, like them being used for wound cleaning, but also them being used as a protein source, whether it's being fed to livestock or humans or whoever it's being fed to, is that, you know, all of these things have their place in nature. Yeah. And they have their role. And you mentioned earlier with parasites, and some parasites are at risk of going extinct. And, you know, I find parasites kind of fascinating in the sense that, well, we think of parasites in terms of causing disease, and there are certainly a lot of parasites that cause disease in humans. There are others that are fairly benign.
Right.
I'm thinking here of roundworms, for instance, which an astonishing percentage of the population has roundworms at any given point. I can't remember. It's something like a third of all the people on the planet are probably walking around with these critters inside of them.
And it would have been much, you know, would have been essentially all of us.
It would have been pretty much everybody. And we're starting to figure out that some of these parasites actually have positive interactions with our guts and our health, just in the same way that earthworms have wonderful interactions with plant roots that we didn't know much about until a few years ago. So
Yeah,
it is sort of fascinating when you start to really understand, like, some of these relationships are more complex than they seem at first and might actually have some value if you can get past the gross factor.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, with worms, for example, I talked to some scientists who say, there's definitely emerging evidence that, that some of these parasites, some of these worms that we, have basically co-evolved with over, hundreds of thousands of years, that they have some beneficial effects on our own immune systems. Our immune systems basically grew up with these, fighting off, learning to recognize who to fight off and who not to fight off. And now that we live a much more kind of sterilized existence, at least in well-off countries with, the kind of medical care that we have now and antibiotics and so forth, we don't have those anymore. And it may actually be contributing to the rise of some of the autoimmune diseases that you see in the Western world, places where people don't have those, kind of natural endemic parasites that we evolved with, are the same countries where you see more autoimmune diseases. And so there have actually been some cases of people with Crohn's disease purposely ingesting worms and parasites in order to try to restore, kind of the ecological balance in their guts. I'm not advocating to do that because I don't think that the research isn't really there yet to support it. But there've been kind of some mixed studies on it, indicating that there may be something to it, right? So I think the scientific jury is still out on that, but it definitely seems like there may be some negative human health consequences to eradicating all of these parasites. So yeah, I mean, I've definitely, over the course of working on this book, I have developed such a love and wonder for all of the creepy crawly, all of the shunned. I guess I love an underdog.
Right. Yeah. These unloved creatures.
Yeah.
So people are always curious about my research process, and I'm curious about your research process. It's clear from reading the book that, there were a lot of situations where you were able to go firsthand and see what scientists are doing, or look at these critters, or understand the process. So maybe you can talk about approaching scientists, about telling stories about their work. I think one thing that's so interesting is that scientists publish, but they tend to publish for their peers in very academic ways. And then we come along as storytellers, and it's like, we're gonna tell the fun version of this. Trust us to get it right, but also know that we're not gonna publish every detail of your research. We're gonna do the glitzy, fun, interesting parts and leave the rest. So what's that like for you talking to folks?
Yeah, I think that it helps me a lot that I come from a background in science, and when I encounter scientists who are really hesitant, which does happen. I mean, some scientists feel like they've been burned. They feel like they've been misquoted, or that their work was, presented in a way that was too silly or flippant, or
sensationalized.
Overhyped. And so, I certainly, of course, try to put people's minds at ease, and they can look at my work and what I've done before and so forth. But I think it also helps to be able to tell them, I've published in peer-reviewed journals as well. I did, I spent 10 years doing lab and field research and publishing in the scientific literature. And so I hear you, and I can kind of speak the language, and translate it, for the general public more. So I think that definitely helps open some doors. For me, the scientists who have been the hardest to get to and to get them to talk to me are the forensic scientists, medical examiners, forensic scientists of any ilk, because so often they're dealing with particular cases, and there are all kinds of prohibitions about what they are allowed to talk about and what they're not. And so the academic scientists, people who are at a university doing research on something like the maggot guy, actually, the maggot farming guy is also a forensic entomologist. And
Oh, sure.
he got into maggots more from the standpoint of looking at them on dead bodies to estimate time of death and lots of other ways. So he's developed a variety of techniques and used those in some high profile criminal cases and testified in court, that kind of thing. But those kinds of folks, if they are academics, then I find that sometimes they're more willing to talk to me about their sort of like pure research, but not so much if the conversation is about particular cases, actual forensic cases. So, but I discovered that, so I went to a forensic science meeting and and basically just would go to people's talks and then go talk to them afterwards. And I definitely found that they, once you got to know them, and it didn't hurt that I could say I was writing a book for National Geographic Books. Okay, right. People trust National Geographic a little more. People kept asking me if I was with the Discovery Channel or what's the one, ID, there's one that does like investigations. It does a lot of true crime. And they were all afraid that I was with some sort of true crime, TV show or something like that. Huh. And so, but when I would say I was writing about forensic science in a book for National Geographic, then they would kind of be a little bit more willing to talk to me. But that's definitely been the hardest kind of nut to crack for me, because they're just, probably rightfully so, they're just really hesitant to talk about some of this stuff. And it does get, just going to those conferences is eye-opening, the kinds of things that they are basically kind of immune to, because they think about this stuff all day long, is pretty, outrageous for the rest of us.
Definitely.
Like I went to a talk that was all about all the ways that an elevator can kill you. For real. And there were pictures.
Wow.
I mean, it makes you like afraid to ever get on an elevator again.
Totally. Yeah.
But they think about this stuff all the time.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, those of you in the audience, put some questions in the Q&A, please, for us. We'll start taking those in just a second. But I just wanted to say also, this book, remind me when the book came out?
Came out in March.
Out in March. So you've had this whole experience of doing a book that came out during, basically the shutdown. And so what I wanted to share with you that would have happened had you gotten to go on a book tour is that you show up and people think that you've brought your critters with you. So with Wicked Bugs, they booked me on these kind of morning, Good Morning Minneapolis kind of TV shows.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, the bug lady's here. And they're like, don't you have some bugs with you? Like, you understand these bugs can kill you, right? Like, that's the point of the book. And how am I going to bring them on an airplane? And what am I going to feed them to keep them alive apart from my own blood? How is this going to work? So something that I did, this is my little show and tell for you, is that I acquired some of the bugs in the book. Like, this is what today we call the murder hornet. We were still calling it the Asian giant hornet when I wrote the book, and some centipedes and millipedes, just bugs in lucite. But I also was able to get an entomologist who's a bug wrangler for Hollywood to put some little specimen boxes together for me with some of the bugs in the book. So I traveled with these. These came with me on the plane, but they're all very safely dead. And they made their media appearances.
Amy, I'm so jealous.
I
I want some deadly bug samples of my own. Those are pretty awesome.
Well, I don't know if you remember a few years ago, there were these stuffed animals of parasites and maggots. I'm sure you've seen these
Sure.
and
Yeah.
germs. I did have a few of those too, and those were fun because they're soft and cute and cuddly, and they fit in the suitcase. So I could see you traveling with those.
Yeah. I've got one of them in my closet.
Of course, I know. I had a whole collection of them. I used to just have them all. I'm like, oh, the plague, it's so cute. Let me get that one.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
one other little thing that we must have, I feel like we must have overlapped on this at some point. Have you ever spoken to a scientist named Justin Schmidt? He's the guy who stung himself all over his body with, he's stung himself with basically every kind of stinging insect possible and rated the pain levels for those. He's fascinating and, just loves, he's an entomologist, loves the insects. And this sort of became a little, hobby.
Yeah, the Schmidt Pain Index.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is useful. Pain is one of those things that's hard to describe. It's hard to describe to someone else pain, and but he came up with a very good way of describing it all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're almost like tasting notes, like.
Right, fizzy, light, fizzy, hot, burning.
Yeah,
yes,
it's great.
All those things. Well, do we want to take some questions?
Sure.
I just noticed this one thing in chat that I thought we could just do real quick, which is that Barbara's asking if there's any information about eating cicadas. An ice cream store in New Jersey was serving cicada ice cream. So let me just tell you that so when Wicked Bugs came out, there was a lot of talk about, oh, let's serve bugs at your event and da. Well, I'm a vegetarian, which and different people have different definitions, but mine is like nothing with a face. And they all have little faces, and I'm not eating them. But a bookseller just recently posted one of those Facebook memory things, and she's like, oh, I'm just thinking back to the days when I ate chocolate-covered crickets with Amy Stewart in our bookstore. And I'm like, you ate chocolate-covered crickets, and I watched you eat them. But what about cicadas? Have you got any cicada comments for us?
Well, so I have not, I feel like I've now eaten a smorgasbord of insects, but cicadas have not been on the menu. And I'm in Tennessee, and we did have tons of cicadas this year. They were dense, and they were extremely loud at my house. And so I kind of thought about it. I thought, for the same reason when I went to this Eating Insects conference, I was like, well, I'm the gory details reporter. I've got to jump in there, and I am an omnivore, so I didn't have any excuses.
Yeah.
Basically, I was like, I have to do it. I have to try it. And so I tried a whole bunch of different insects, including silkworm pupae, which are like silkworm kind of, in between the larvae and the adult. And those are big. Those are at least as big as a cicada, and kind of similar, I would say, in overall appearance and texture, which is to say that I found that one very hard to eat. Okay. The little crispy crickets and things like that, not so bad. The silkworm pupa was a challenge. And for me, when I was looking at the cicadas out here in the trees, I just couldn't bring myself to do it. And I don't know, I think it's a little bit like you, Amy, like they've got these big eyes and little faces. And
their mothers love them.
Their mothers love them. And, it's not so much the part of, I can get past the idea of eating them now. I could eat one, but I can't kill one in order to eat it. I can't bring myself to do it. And so that has stopped me personally from eating cicadas. But if you Google cicada recipes online, there's a lot. And what I've heard is the best thing to do is, you go and you collect just a bunch of them, grab them up and put them in you can blanch them, basically just like quick, like boil them real quick. Like I said, I couldn't bring myself to do it. It's like, I can't do that to a lobster either. And it's kind of the same thing. But you just kind of blanch them real quick by boiling them for just, I don't know, a minute or something. And then you take them out, and then you can just put them in a plastic bag and freeze them. And then you can use them for other things. personally, I would say if you are interested in trying eating insects, definitely go for crispy first because it's just a lot more palatable, especially I think to, the Western diet. Like we're not
Right.
so much into squishy. And so my experience with insects, taught me that I am totally a normal Westerner and, squeamish about all the same things that everybody else is. And, but the crispy, if you can,
Yeah.
you can deep fry something.
There you go. A little salt and butter, and
Exactly. And then it basically tastes like fried thing.
Right.
And
it's popcorn at that
if
point.
you like fried things, you're going to like fried cicadas too.
All right.
Okay. I think that's a great note for me to come and help ask a few more questions. It's I'm from Southern California, so all my insect eating has come in the form of like Mexican food, like the grasshopper, a noted Mexican delicacy. There's like this sauce you make with ants that's supposed to be like the best sauce in the world that I'd love to try.
Ants were the best thing that I tried, actually. They were there were these ants that they sprinkled on top of things like shrimp, and they were lemony tasting. I think maybe it's the formic acid in the ants. I don't know, but it had this kind of light, acidic, lemony kind of flavor to it. So it's not bad.
That's what I've heard. I've heard an ant is a treat.
Yeah. There's a reason you'll see, chimpanzees and, fishing for ants. They'll take sticks and stick it in an anthill and, and then basically just ants right off of it. I guess they're quite the delicacy.
Yeah. So in the Q&A, John comments that Erica has helped consult on a few grisly horror stories / novels. And that her book has been a smash hit with the horror writing community.
Yay.
I would love to know more about that. How did you end up there? Is it a bug specific consulting or?
No, but I have a relative. John is a nephew, and he is a very wonderful budding horror writer himself. And so we've bonded over, I guess I've always been into sort of gross stuff. I grew up on, Stephen King, and I guess it's probably the really hardcore horror fans probably consider Stephen King like horror light, but I definitely was reading that stuff probably at a much younger age than I should have been. And so I've always had that appreciation. I love a good monster story. I love all of that stuff. Mm-hmm. And again, I've gone off into the science side of, exploring the real science behind our fears and the monsters that haunt our dreams. But I've always loved those kinds of monster tales as well. And I think deep down somewhere there's a fiction writer in me somewhere, which actually is something that I was hoping to get a chance to ask Amy about, because you've got this really unique background of writing all of these great true stories, and then you've done some historical fiction as well that I think is so amazing. The Miss Kopp series, for anyone who hasn't read it, is based on the real life of Constance Kopp, who was, tell me if I get this wrong, the first female deputy sheriff in the United States back in the 1910s?
Yeah, 1910s. Yeah. Yeah, so I still got to do a lot of research because almost everything in those books is true in one way or another.
That's what I was curious about. Like, how do you bridge that? Because when I'm reading, a Miss Kopp novel, it feels so rich and full of detail, and it reads just like a fictional story. But I know that you've rooted all of it in fact. How do you do that? How do you find how do you do the research to find enough detail that you can kind of feel like you're fleshing out that world and still being true to the real history?
Well, the research is everything from newspapers. The great thing about the 1910s is that it was a very rich time for newspapers. Every little town in America had probably 2 or 3 rival newspapers, and those were just the English language newspapers. There would have been an Italian newspaper, and there would have been a lot of papers.
Wow.
And everything was documented in the newspaper because it was basically the only media we had. We didn't even have radio yet. So much of everyday life is in there, and you can get these weird little things, like something weird happened at somebody's house and it's going to end up in the paper the next day. So you can get these really bizarre details, but a lot of it has been digitized. So I did have to go spend a lot of time in library basements going through microfilm, but still a fair amount of it I can do from my own home, and it's fully searchable. So that really helps, but also actually, reading books from the 1910s. So like I have shelves and shelves full of 110-year-old novels here. So that gives me kind of the voice and the pacing and the vibe of a 1910s novel, but also, again, all of these random little details of everyday life that they're not trying to explain because they have no awareness of us in 2020 or 2021. And that's what I want. Like, I want books that read as if it's 1910 and there is no 2020. So like, if you can imagine a novel written today where a character might say, I'm just going to text you a picture. Like, that's all they're going to say. They're just going to say, I'll text you a picture. They're not going to say, I'm going to get out my iPhone 6X, an oblong black object with a button on the front and a camera on the back. And I'm going to, do you know what I mean? They wouldn't explain what that means. It would just go right by you. And
Right.
so that's always the goal, is it's like, have all those details in there, but have them in there in such a way that it's ignoring a modern audience. And you might have to go look something up. You might have to just figure it out for yourself.
Yeah.
So
Well, I appreciate that. And I appreciate not over explaining things to the reader, because it just takes you right out of the story, like you were saying. And so I actually kind of do remember that there were some things, just words, descriptions, even things like clothing items and stuff like that we don't wear, use anymore. I have to go look those up, What is that? But it's fun because I feel like I'm learning something along the way. So, but it's interesting to me that, I'm curious how you kind of made that jump from writing about science and plants and bugs into something that's totally different, where you're writing about, solving mysteries and crimes and the whole.
Oh yeah, I know. Well, I had been wanting to write fiction for a while. Like, in between many of my nonfiction books is a failed attempt at a novel in a drawer. But I really fell in love with the Kopp sisters, and I really actually started to feel a certain sense of obligation to them. Like, anyone could have found you, but I found you. Like everyone had forgotten about Constance. No one knew who she was. And I thought, wow, I'm the one who found the story, and I really want to tell it, and I'm not going to be talked out of it. But I definitely got that advice from publishers, like, well, why don't you write a novel about a botanist who's a, and I'm like, because that's not what spoke to me. Like, that's not what, it's like, you have to get married to a book. Like, I'm not, this is what I got married to, and I'm going to do it. So I really just ignored all of that. And people will sometimes ask me, like, well, why don't you have like someone get killed with a plant and you could, but that did not actually happen in her job. Like, she's a real person with a real job, and I'm writing about the real thing she did, and she didn't do that thing. So, and again, like, to me, that feels like, well, now we're back in 2020. And so I even have a little kind of jokes to myself in there, like, because they did live on a farm in real life. And I have it that, like, Constance's job is to take care of their sort of little kitchen garden, but she hates it. She hates gardening. So, like, that's very specifically my little joke of saying, no, she's not going to be a gardener. She's never pulling a weed. She detests it.
I like it. I like that, your little protest.
Yeah, I know. Yes. Wonderful, wonderful way to navigate a career. Ignore the advice that everyone's giving.
Yeah, well, that's pretty much what I've been doing so far, and it seems to be going okay.
Right.
So we'll just keep
Totally. Well, I just want to say, I know we're wrapping up, but I do want to say that over the years, my books have definitely been picked up by teenagers who
Mhm.
where it sort of worried me. I'm like, are you
Yeah.
sure? Because there's sort of some adult material in there.
Yes.
And while there is definitely some adult material in here too, I know that the science geek teenagers will flip out over this book, and that the grosser it is, the more intriguing it is. So I want you guys in the audience to think about that as potential gift giving. And I also just want to say real quick, I used to own an independent bookstore. I can tell you that the only way bookstores keep their doors open is if people buy books from the bookstore. It's literally loving them does not help. Coming to the Zoom events is nice, but buying books is what really matters. So please, if it's not one of our books, think about buying a book from these good folks at Belmont and supporting your own independent bookstore. If this last year has taught us anything, it's that our beloved local businesses will not be here forever. They're not permanent. They only survive if we take money out of our wallets and put it into their cash registers. So please think about that.
Absolutely.
Thank you,
And I will put in the last little plug for that, which is that, some books really are better as physical books. And I think both of us can proudly say that that's the case, because you do not get the same experience on a Kindle of the illustrations in Amy's books. And you would not get my glow in the dark cover if you get the Kindle version. This cover glows in the dark.
Now
And
that
which
should
was
be
which
the
was
#1 selling.
exactly, which was a huge surprise. I did not know until I received my copies of the book that the cover was going to glow in the dark. And so it's a big thrill, and another thing, it can serve double duty. It's also a nightlight. Put it by your bedside.
Perfect.
So that's I would love to just echo that and say, please buy books, and even if it's not a glow in the dark cover book, buy your books from an independent bookstore like Belmont Books.
Thank you so much, Erica, and thank you, Erica and Amy, for your generosity with your time. Thank you for doing this event with us, for sharing about your both of your equally fascinating and multifaceted careers. So
Christy froze.
I know. We might have lost her.
We might have lost her.
If
Amy, you want to take us out?
I guess I'll just take us out. I don't think I have the ability to actually end the meeting, but I will say thanks to everybody, and stay in touch with us. Find us on our website, social media. Stay in touch with Belmont Books. And we sure do appreciate y'all spending time with us today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody. Take care. Have a great night.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.